If for some reason you missed the call or you'd like to go back to the call, use your membership ID, get into the back end of the 1776 Syndicate, and you can go back and listen to previous calls. We wait until we have 2 or 3, then we upload them. So we're a couple behind on there right now, but this will be our 3rd and we'll upload them all. So thank you for being there. We just ask that you keep your computers on mute during the discussion. Once we get to the Q&A portion, raise your hand and we'll get you questions asked and answered so that we can make sure that you're a part of the conversation, everything that's going on. We also ask that you don't record the calls because we want to maintain the files on our end. And of course, we're sharing those with you. And then anybody that gets out of line, we're just going to cut them off, drop them off the call. So please refrain from that. We're here to learn, discuss, and be proactive. Before everybody got on the call, Darin and I and John and Rod were talking about the infighting sometimes in the Republican Party, and that's what we really want to try to avoid. So with that being said, I've got Darin as our special guest today. I've heard about Darin for many months and what he's doing with Restore Liberty, but I had the opportunity to meet him at the GOP kickoff this year about a month ago and just had some wonderful conversations with Darin. He's very in line with what we're trying to do, not only here in the state, but he's got a broader reach. I know he's got some reach down in Utah and probably other places that he can share about. And you know what I think is great about what Darin is doing is he's lighting and igniting that fire for more people to get involved. And the way I see where we're aligned is he's out there igniting that, and then people are looking for the next step and where do they go, what do they do? And hopefully here at the Syndicate, we're able to give them the steps to run for office and run successfully and give them the tools, right? So that's how we're connected. But at the same time, I think Darin has a very important message about his reach with people and how he's getting people excited to be involved in the party. So Darin, I hope I did you some justice there. Please tell us more about Restore Liberty, what you do and what you're working on. That would be wonderful.
Cool. Yep. Thanks, Jim. And for anybody up on a computer, if you want to crack open restore-liberty.org, if you have the ability to do that, that'll give you a sense of what the website looks like and where we're working. So just by way of background, I hate talking about myself, but I think it's necessary that people understand where folks are coming from, what their background is, so they get an idea of people's motivations and why they're doing what they're doing. So been married for 27 years, coming up on 28 in July. We have 2 growing kids. My wife is a special education teacher who had to quit her job and move out of the way because she couldn't wear masks for allergies and various other reasons. So she started her own business doing tutoring of special needs kids. She's found that she can be with one kid for an hour a week and get more done than a school can in the entire week. So my oldest daughter, 25, married, lives in Great Falls, and she is a teacher as well. They just moved there back home to Montana from Reno. And so we got 2 teachers in the family. So education is near and dear to our heart. In Restore Liberty, we say children are our future and judges are supposed to guard our Constitution. So we look at those 2 things pretty heavily, and I'll get to that in a bit. But family's been here in Montana for 5 generations now. First moved into the Sydney area, down into Fallon County, Glendive, across to Bozeman. And so basically people ask, I know somebody named blank, whatever Gaub, and are you related to him? Yes. I have no idea how, most of them, but we're all over the state. I've been here for a very long time. So I retired out of the Army after 28 years as a lieutenant colonel, was enlisted first, became an officer, was in the infantry while I was mostly enlisted in the Presidential Honor Guard, and did 7 deployments as an aviation officer, flew helicopters for 22 years. And that covered East Asia, North Africa, East Europe, 4 tours to Afghanistan, all over the US, and all points in between, just because apparently I like to fly in big green aircraft that you get no frequent flyer miles on. So that's what happened. Retired, came back to Montana, here to Helena. Grew up in Bozeman though, but couldn't afford to retire there, as you can probably imagine, and not have your entire retirement go to a mortgage of some postage stamp. So We bought a house here in Helena in 2007, right downtown by the cathedral. No intention to ever leave the state of Montana. Just wanted a simple job, do something that had meaning, but nothing difficult, and started doing funerals for coordinating for funeral honors to veterans across the state, which was a rewarding job. And I had to quit in order to do Restore Liberty voluntarily because the two started to encroach on each other. And believe it or not, ethics matter. And I wasn't going to let my voluntary political activity impact on a federal or a National Guard contract. So I stepped aside and said, I'll sacrifice all that income in order to do what I'm doing now, because I think it's important for kids and grandkids. And I'm just trying to be one small part of a long-term solution for the country in whatever way I can. So lately, as we get into the Restore Liberty, you'll see why that matters. But mostly now it's work as a leadership coach. I work as a strategist for military and non-military entities, and doing different kinds of plans. And in the end, though, I realized that I couldn't leave my oath aside that I took in the military, that it had no expiration date, and that in order for me to be able to stand at the end of whatever all of this results in, I wanted to be able to say that I did everything I possibly could and found some of the most phenomenal people across this country to join alongside whoever that may be in whatever organization that is, to get people to work together, not apart, to be a unifying factor and provide some of the leadership to this country that we think it lacks at the grassroots level. And because so many people are looking to, the celebrity circus for leadership, when the leadership they need is sitting in the chair that they're sitting in at the same time. They are the leadership. So that's part of the message that we want to get out there. And so ultimately, I want to live my life to be worthy of the sacrifice that so many others have made for as long as this country has been around. I want to be able to stand there at the end and say, I gave it my all, win or lose. And I also want to be able to say that I'm always in second place and God's in first. And if we fail, it's probably because something I didn't obey in following along in that way. So that's some background, I guess. Restore Liberty itself, organizationally, this is something that started in January 2020. It was initially building a network of trusted people here in Helena. Then it grew to Lewis and Clark County. Then it grew to building trust across people across the state. And then it went nationwide, which is not anything I expected at all. But in order to do anything that we're doing without trust, you can't do any of it. And it has to be earned. We know it cannot be given. And so we are patient as much as we can be with building that trust. So some of the things we do with Restore Liberty, structurally, I'm the national executive director and co-founder. My other co-founder is in Seattle and Bainbridge, moving to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Public relations director is in Dallas, Fort Worth. He used to be the public relations director for the Convention of States, and then jumped out of that when their national team kind of went a little bit haywire. My deputy director is currently serving in the Border Patrol in Cut Bank. And you can imagine what that's like for him right now. My national political director and super PAC director is down in Miami. And we've got 32 state directors right now. And if I end up with some time I need to kill for you or whatever, I can walk you through who some of those folks are and what they're doing. But that's everything from running for Secretary of State in one state to running for Congress in another, and running for a county attorney in another place. And it's just been awesome. But a lot of our folks work with Freedom Caucus style legislator teams across many of our states that we're in. Specifically, best examples are Mississippi, Texas, Colorado, and here where I also do the state director duties with a fair number of folks within our state legislator teams. And we provide another citizen voice and set of eyes to legislation and bills. And if someone's already carrying something forward, like the Montana Family Foundation with school choice, we do not want to get involved in writing of the bill. I mean, unless they ask us to, but we will provide grassroots efforts to get behind it. Whatever is needed is what we're going to end up doing. One of the things we do differently also is we build the coalitions. So on our website, there's a Friends of Restore Liberty page, and you can see multiple different organizations that are aligned with us. There's no exchange of money. There's no paperwork signing. or anything like that. It just means like that we've talked, we get along, and we're going to help magnify each other's efforts, because that's how we think we can avoid the competition. And that's part of the reason why Toby is here from Virginia, is because I talked to the national team of the iVoter Guide. We realized that we were very much in line with each other, and Restore Liberty endorses candidates. And they do candidate education based on scales and methods that they use that we love. And so why would we try to recreate something they're already doing? We'll take a lot of their research and work that they're doing. We'll help inform it from Montana, for example, but we'll also take their information and use it to inform our endorsements across the country. We've endorsed 50 candidates in 22 states right now, at all levels, from governor down to, or up to, depending on how you look at it, county clerk. Yeah, because we believe everything is local. If you want to fix things, like constructing a house, you start at the foundation and work your way up. You don't start at the roof and work your way down. We stop worrying about who the president is, stop worrying about who's in the U.S. Senate, and start worrying about who your clerk and recorder is, and who your city commissions are. As you can imagine, living in Helena, of course, we have plenty of challenges there. As an example, in Florida, we have a super PAC, and that is designed to gather funding in order to help people running for school boards. And it's we're still working on getting that thing funded. We know it's based on that trust again. And we have an ultimate desire to create a little spin-off organization that can become a counter to the unions, meaning that if teachers are always pressured to join unions because they need the legal coverage in case they have something happen in a school. Well, they don't have anywhere else to go for that. What if we created something where they did? And maybe you could call it, I call it ENUF, ENUF, Educator Non-Union Fund. Set up a table across the street from a school and say, hey, sign up here and we'll provide you legal coverage. And this is all in this just initial stages, but oftentimes I'm a pilot, of course, from the Army. So if there's one runway, and then you got one aircraft, and there's no other airports out there, well, you're going to go back to the airport you came from. It's the only option you've got. What if we create a different place for these teachers to land? Unions have to represent everybody, but that doesn't mean they have to join it. So that's just one of those things we do as well. So we're specifically digging into teachers or into school boards, excuse me, and judicial races. And that's where we're also working with iVoter Guide, because they're going to get into those even more. And Toby may want to expand on that, but we're getting ready to come out with another organization here in Montana with recommendations across the state about judges, because judicial reform is going to be a big deal this next legislative session, and that fight is going to be pretty nasty, I'm sure. Okay, that's Restore Liberty, I guess, in a nutshell. Other things that we do, though, and where we're working other efforts, because we think this has to be, although it has to be distributed across multiple organizations, it still has to be, in some cases, centrally advertised and working together. So on the medical freedom front, and one of our spinoff organizations is called Move Freely America. And Move Freely America is where we bring together transportation industry people. So, for example, Brian Brazy, who's leading up the national effort on the trucker convoy stuff. Talked to him and Jeremy and Maureen. They're aware of this, and they're going to, whenever what they're doing now comes to an end, and whatever that looks like, they're going to hop on with us and work with this. Southwest Freedom Flyers, if you're seeing all the protests and stuff like that with the Southwest Airlines employees protesting their own company and the mandates, they form the core of that organization now, and we work together. One of their pilots wrote a thing called medicalfreedomact.org, which is a template for medical freedom for any state to use anywhere they want. Montana is, with House Bill 702, is one of the strongest laws in the country. So generally we're pretty good on that, but a lot of other states don't have anything. That's a way to go take a look at what you can do on medical freedom side. And so that gives us a common platform of policy and legislation. And ultimately, we focus on we the people solutions to everything, not looking for someone to save us, I guess you could say. So that falls under what I call the GALT strategy, which is we're always looking at like alternative economies and solutions. Back to that picture of an airplane with nowhere else to land but where it came from. In case you didn't know that, there's already people building alternative medical facilities. If you ever heard of Dr. Stella Emanuel, she was one all over the news who'd been treating various diseases and stuff in Africa, and was talking about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and the effectiveness of all these drugs. America's frontline doctors, they're building non-government affiliated medical capabilities. There's an organization building private airlines. And so we're kind of there with them all. We may not be the main effort or the main workers on any of these, on some of these things, but all of us are associated and working with each other in some capacity, because we all know that we have to work together. You may have heard the quote, and I'll paraphrase. It says, we all have to hang together, or surely we shall all hang separately. And we think that's important to remember, that we can fight them and squabble among ourselves, but we have to stick together no matter what. We recognize that, and I think everybody here would recognize that we're clearly under attack. Government's out of control. They've breached the contract called the Constitution. Canada is a great example of, a parliament that votes itself powers outside of the boundaries of their constitution as well. Our message is that the real heroes in saving this country are the grassroots citizens all banding together. And that's why we wrote on our page, we have a thing on our left side called the Practical Tacticals. And it's a way of getting people out of the clouds and being all worried about what Biden and Harris are doing and all these different things. And it gives them a whole list of things they can do locally, state level, and the federal level. And most of it is all local action. And in this case, it's your school board. If that's your passion, you get involved, get some training, and we provide some of that training through grassroots teams in Texas, and find 3 or 4 or 5 other people that'll work along with you. Then increase that team and just get engaged and start. We can't just sit and complain about it. We've got to start doing something. It's definitely not the time to run away from the conflict. And in the end, I think it's what's really neat about this is the ability to travel the country, speak to groups all over the country, and see that community is really coming back the way it's supposed to be. And all of us, I'm sure, would say that we're all guilty in some measure of trusting in government too much and not being involved enough. And we can't keep doing that. So that's 16 minutes or so into it, and I enjoy the Q&A usually more than anything else, but that's Restore Liberty, 32 states. If we have some time or you have any questions about some of our state directors and what they do, happy to share that as well. But I'll hand it back to you, Jim, and
Darin,
go from there.
Thank you for that wonderful background on what you're doing, what you've done, and thank you for your service, by the way. I appreciate that. A lot of people that are running for office, oftentimes we feel like we're on a little island, right? We've got a few friends around us kind of lifting us up, giving us the charge to go. And at the same time, here in Montana, we also feel like we're on an island. And I know we've got representatives from other states that watch this, not only tonight, but in the future. What can you speak to on a national level of what you're seeing and what these little islands mean to the bigger picture in terms of giving them encouragement for doing what they're doing, even if it's a school board or a city clerk?
Great question. And I run into that a lot. I guess the best comparison I have is to compare it to a choir. If I'm in church, in a church singing by myself to an empty room, it sounds horrible. I can't do that. But even the worst of us singers, if we're put into a choir of 150 or 200 people, can make some pretty good music. And that choir is building over time. 3,500 counties plus in this nation. And what you see in front of us on these screens here is being replicated across the nation in every county. And for people should know that that is happening. The media is obviously not going to talk about it, but you saw Douglas County, Colorado, they flipped the school board, and that school board fired the superintendent. Loudoun County, Virginia, I talked to them and how they did their business to change things. North Carolina, I've talked to them about how they've been exposing the disturbing nastiness of the books and library, and is creating a groundswell of opportunity for people, because darkness to light, and then in the dark for so long that this silver lining of what's going on through the COVID fake pandemic and everything, it's exposed. It's brought all this stuff out into the light. And if you're in a giant building that's completely dark and you're in the corner with a pen light, everybody can see that. And so every single person who's running for a school board position as a candidate should know that they are not alone, that there are so many people out there who've never done this before, never wanted to, but feel they have to. And all you can do is just start. And there's a lot of people out there willing to train and get people educated about how to do this. I've got a lot of folks who work political consultant work and advice, who are like us, who sure, they'll do some things paid, but they'll take on pro bono work, I guess you could say too, and be like, hey, here's just some simple advice. I ran against Kim Abbott here in Montana for state legislature. I've never done that before. I learned a lot in one race. And so people ask me for advice, and I'm like, well, here's how to lose, apparently. But I guess just the biggest lesson is that to have the encouragement to know that if there's 10 people in a county that are stepping up, multiply that times 3,500 counties, you're not alone.
Yeah, good point. You also brought up in your discussion a little bit about the judiciary, and I'd like you to speak on why that's so important, because I think oftentimes it's overlooked. Obviously, it was in the spotlight when President Trump was able to nominate a couple, major moves in the justice system. But I think it's equally important here on the state level, and I certainly understand how Montana works. But can you talk about that a little bit for those that aren't in the know? And by the way, I think this is a very important topic of conversation for anybody to make note of, because it's these judges that are making the final ruling on our laws in our state. And we've got John Fuller here on the call, who's put a lot of things, a lot of bills to pass, and the judges can push back on those. So Darin, please, if you don't mind.
No, I'm sure. And that's why that super PAC in Miami was formed, because we really wanted to say that children are our future, but those judges are supposed to be guardians of the Constitution, regardless of whether it's a popular decision or not. And oftentimes, and as we've seen repeatedly, our judges are weaponized agendas against us, who are disregarding the intent and purpose of that Constitution. I'm an originalist when it comes to that, for sure. And I think most of us probably would be. But you hit the nail on the head. It doesn't matter what we pass as a law in the state of Montana if our Montana Supreme Court is just going to trash it all. Regardless of whether the majority wants it or not, they're going to step way outside the bounds and do whatever they want. And unless we take it to the Supreme Court, that's where it ends. And how do you combat that? Well, first of all, we've got to start by figuring out how we research judges, get to know them as candidates, and you really got this is like a decades fight to rebuild the judiciary, because you go to law school, you get groomed and programmed, and some people escape that, most don't, and then they work through the lawyer ranks in the bar, and they become city, county, whatever, all these kinds of things for those that get involved in government. And they're often beholden to masters for some reason, whether it be, they're exposed for something or money's involved, who knows. But if the judiciary is not straight, then our Constitution is constantly trampled. And if that's what happens, no law on the land matters. And the next step in order to fix that is someplace that nobody wants to go to.
Yeah, and again, I think that this is such a critical point to make. A lot of the meetings that I've been to with the pachyderm or the central committee where the chairman of the GOP has spoken and some of our other elected officials, they talk about how important it is to run for school board and the elected people in the school board, the people on city council. Rod Kuntz is on the health board here. And I would say in the past, all these types of positions aren't in the limelight, and they're certainly not the first position you think about running for when you want to run for a political office, but they're so critical in how we lead our lives every single day, especially when you interact in our cities, whether that's with the sheriff or your kids at school, or, how the cities ran and the mask mandates and all these things. And I think it's important to note how they all intertwine and connect and are equally important, especially as we talk about our judiciary system. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for making that a part of your focus. Is there any other outlying things that you guys are involved with, Darin, that we didn't touch on that maybe are kind of a little bit obscure?
No, I think I got the big nuggets of it all. I mean, where we've been very successful is last week we went over 250 media interviews just between two of us, my co-founder and I. And that's from Newsmax all the way down to Montana Talks or in Northwest Liberty News. It's like we don't turn down media opportunities. And I think that's important to establishing trust with people, because there's so much out there with grift and the celebrity circus. There's people you think are on your side that aren't. They're making a ton of money preying on people's emotions that I think we need to avoid. And so I think that's indicative of that people want to hear from us. Mm-hmm. And it's not us particularly, but it's the message that really matters. A lot of our interviews lately have all been about the Ukraine, because my co-founder and I both have significant European experience in dealing with that. But that's just a part of building trust. They recognize that we've got some other experiences we can talk about besides constitutional history, theory, law, founding fathers' intent, and all that, all those things, which we love to do. But we can talk about a lot of other things as well. My co-founder is a retired brigadier general from the Air Force. We got along great. Another pilot. So it's
thank you for that.
Veteran founded, but nothing by any means veteran pure. And if you could see and meet every single one of my state directors, you would love them. They're just phenomenal people. Well,
I think what you're doing is great work. By the way, if you've got questions, whether they're for Darin or they're just about running for any office, school board specific, it doesn't matter. Feel free to raise your hand. I know Rod Kuntz has a question. Rod, if you want to throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks. Darin, I really appreciate what you've managed to accomplish with all this. And again, I think the synchronicity of different organizations coming together to do all of these things is really important. But I'd like you to speak, if you would, for a little bit about, you just mentioned methods. And, I'm on the health board here now, and we are a hotbed. And city councils, I was prior city council. So there's a lot of animus out there in the community. And so many people are coming at it with anger and protests and loud voices. And I'd like you to speak about methods and, keeping, how you work within the system without raising your voice and still get things done and be effective. Because I think it's a lot more effective in the long run to use the Robert's Rules of Order, to use the system to our advantage, and how you've managed to do that.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. And I think that starts off with that trust thing again. And then we work from there. But sometimes the loudest voice isn't always the one that's most heard. And when we talk to candidates, we talk about the fact that we've got to be, first of all, joyful warriors, meaning that you don't get up there in front and create this just scene of pure anger. It's ineffective. It's not heard. It doesn't mean that you're not being courageous in front of a school board, for example, or in front of giving testimony to any organization or whatever you're doing. But it's the ability to know the material, make your points with courage, be measured in your approach without being monotone, and being the one in the room that can, in the end, no matter what, you're standing on the high ground, and not creating that scene that just doesn't get heard. I mean, we've all seen them in the news, that the ones that are often are super loud and angry in front of these boards are often on the news because you see them getting drug out in cuffs. Not that I necessarily agree with that, but getting up there and just speaking like that tends to get you nowhere. It is awfully tempting though. So that's what we try to. One of the best things I ever heard from some of the producers and stuff at Newsmax and other organizations like that said that the way that my co-founder and I do interviews is that we're capturing the moderates, and you can define that however you want. But we're capturing the moderates because we're bringing a message before them that talks about and focuses on the idea of liberty as the most important thing. And of course, internally, we would all say faith is before that. Faith leads to liberty. But if you operate on a principled level like that, then you never make it about a person. And even the people that I would disagree with across the street from me here, I'm pretty sure if I went over there and talked to them and said, do you want the government making your decisions for you, how you raise your kids, how you educate your kids? I mean, do you want that to happen for you? I don't want it to happen for me. But so I think we're on the same side in this. And they start realizing that when you focus on the idea of liberty, that is not party specific. And we're really, in some cases, we're fighting for the same thing, just through different methods. And if we identify those people, we can pull them into the fold, because they're no longer seeing R and D. They're seeing a liberty-minded American who wants to live free of government coercion. And if we can do that in a mature, measured fashion and keep the message consistent, no matter what kind of race a person's running for, we found great success in doing that.
Darin, can
I hope that answers.
That was a good question, good answer. Darin, can I ask you about that specifically? Because I think oftentimes, and I was very pleased of Trump's presidency and the things that he accomplished. But I realize that we have a lot of constituents that say, I'll take anything but that. And apparently that is anything with an R, right? So we're all in this for our Constitution, our liberties. And we do have a little bit of an uphill battle with an R next to our name, or at least a conservative behind our back here. How are you guys fighting that to a degree? Because I know it comes up, and I want people to have tools to be able to answer the questions when they're door knocking, all those other things. And by the way, after you answer that, Jerry, I'll have you ask your question.
Well, first and foremost, we remind them that Restore Liberty is apolitical. Well, not apolitical, is not party affiliated in any way. Anybody can come in and be part of what we're doing, as long as they're part of that liberty focused crowd. Obviously, yes, the majority of all of our people would identify with the R, but I say about 50% of the Republican team is really batting for the other side anyways. So when it comes to that, we leave the party affiliations aside, and we just focus on the principles again and the ideas of liberty. Trump's not going to save you. Trump's a fallible human being. He's a lightning rod for good reasons and bad. So if we take the personality out of it, a lot of the emotion out of it, then we can focus on really life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it is defined by the individual. Obviously, there's some nuance to that when it comes to dealing with kids and what the things like transgenders and women's sports type of stuff. That's a different debate. There are cultural decisions we have to make as a nation, but for the most part, I think if we can stick to those principles again, that helps. Well, and I hope that helps answer that part of the question. I mean, I'm a GOP county chair here in Lewis and Clark County. I know about half of my committee is working against me every single day. I hear the birds chirping, and that's okay. But in the end, it's a lower priority to me because George Washington became president without being a party member. And anybody can be voted into office without even being part of a party.
Yeah.
To tell people not to give money to our central committee, to give it to a candidate that they like. I think party rules and leadership by committee is horrible most of the time. So we stick to just we the people as American citizens, trying to guarantee the equal liberty for all of us to make our own decisions and a minimal government.
Thank you. Jerry, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. So my question is, you had mentioned something about the school board and where we could get information if we were running for the school board. And I was just hoping that you could explain a little bit more about that. I'm running for a local school board here in Flathead County. Would you mind explaining a little bit more about where I could get more information about that?
Sure. Well, and I'm going to cheat because this is a perfect example of how this works. It is, although we do certain amount of grassroots training through our grassroots training team out of Texas, that's mostly for legislation push. And we have some people who do a little bit of political consultancy work who help me with identifying candidates that can be vetted and endorsed. But I don't want to get involved in it and try to compete alongside of a project that's already working. So, as Jim will tell you, I've pointed probably 5 or 6 candidates to him, what he's doing.
Right.
So I would, if you and I met in the street and we talked and you said, I want to get involved in school board, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know how to do this, never done it before, what's a great resource? I would send you to Jim.
Right.
So, and that's how the coalition thing works. So, Jim can help train, Jim can help do certain things with the PAC. And then we, through the Montanans for Limited Government, myself and a few other organizations, and can come alongside and help inform and influence the iVoter Guide, and that Toby is working on with their team to make sure that they've got the best product with the people closest to the candidates in Montana that they can possibly get. Because the more sources of information out there to educate the voters, the better. And the more disciplined and knowledgeable the people who are assessing candidates are, I think that puts them in front of the voters even better as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to add a little bit to that, Jerry. It's a really good question, so thank you for asking it. We've got 2 separate things going on here, right? You've got to run for an office, an elected position. So you've got the task of going out, building up your name, finding the votes to get in on this school board. And that's going to require you going out, knocking on doors, and some of the things that you and I have talked about personally, right? Once you get in that position, then I'm going to take this hat off and I'm going to put my school board hat on. I say, give me a call and I can help walk you through what to expect. Matter of fact, there's a lot of people on this call that could probably help you once you're an elected official, what to expect in that role. And oftentimes it's understanding your district and what trials and tribulations they've gone through and what type of ball of wax you've gotten yourself into, right? But I think what's also important about what Darin does and what so many other people that come and go on these calls is they offer a support system for you to go out and run for office and feel confident that you're doing the right thing for your community and that there's like-minded people. Like Darin said, I mentioned sometimes you feel like you're on an island, but even here on this call, you've got a dozen people here, probably 2 dozen more that'll watch this call in the next couple of days that are all like-minded doing the same thing that you're doing. And that's raising your hand to run for an office. And it is, you've made the commitment, you've signed the paper, and now that you're involved, it might not seem like it's an overtaxing thing. But a lot of people will not do that. And it's amazing how many people have already dropped off since we started this group less than 8 weeks ago, have come and gone already because they backed out of the process. So again, you've got 2 separate things going, same thing for everybody. you're running for an office, the first step is to get elected, be knowledgeable, take in as much as you can. Once you're elected, then educate yourself on what it takes to do a good job in that role, right? Rod, you had a question, go for it.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be, it's more of a comment really. And it's just, once you've made that decision, I think it's important to stay plugged in. And Darin, I have to say, after listening to what you've done, I have constituents out there on other boards that I'm going to be plugging into you. You know, this is a help network. And, you know, I'm here not just to help myself or to help the people that we know in our local districts. I'm here to help anyone I can to further the cause of liberty. And so I will be reaching out. And again, networking is so important. So I guess what I'm saying is, once you're in, it's important to stay plugged in, you know, to keep getting new information and be around these ideas and be around like-minded people.
Right. I 100% agree. It's absolutely critical. And I think that's probably what I spend 90% of my day doing, is just connecting people together who can help each other in very specialized ways. You know, I guess I consider myself like a jack of all trades, master of none, and that's probably best case. But I back myself up by working with Montanans for Limited Government, Montanans for Family and Health Rights, hopefully the Montana Family Foundation and Freedom Protection Project, and the Council on Judicial Accountability. And we all make mistakes, but the more of us that are at least like-minded enough to know that we want to be focused on liberty, we can debate how we get there openly and honestly. But the network, like you said, that's absolutely critical. When I started doing this, people were just like, "Oh my God, I thought I was all alone in this entire thing," and that's half the battle right there.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, when we talk about network, part of the reason that Rod and I decided to start this group is to give everybody on this call tonight, but also all of our members, access to a network of individuals that are either doing what you're doing or have done what you're doing, or what you're aspiring to do through the election process. And if you notice on any of the other calls, I usually call out some of the elected officials that are on the call. We've had county commissioners, we've got health board, we've got school board, we've got legislators, we've had people running for Congress. The list goes on. And so as you're listening to this in the future or tonight, realize that you've got an incredible network of people to reach out to ask these important questions, gain access to, and certainly when they're on the call, ask them directly. So with that, I'm going to call John Fuller out real quick, because we have time for a quick history lesson on something. John is our elected legislator here, Flathead County, and John's running for Senate. John, any relevant news you want to share that's happening anywhere around the world or here in Montana, or anything you wanted to share with the group tonight?
There we go. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, we were talking earlier about judges and school board members, and of course, Darin was talking about how I guess you're not necessarily apolitical, but you're a political party. Not 3 words, but only 2. But I would offer to you that the nonpartisan elections was a progressive accomplishment in the 1970s, and it spread throughout the country. And at the local level, what have the nonpartisan elections got us? I would offer to you what they've gotten us is the deep state at the local level of progressives. And I don't, if I had a definitive answer as to how to overturn that, I wouldn't be an obscure pensioner running for a state senate here in Montana. But I have an idea. And I think what we need to do is restore partisanship to the localities of the local elections, because the people vote for, I know this is going to come as a shock to some of us, but a lot of times politicians lie when they're campaigning. And consequently, forcing them to put a D or an R or an I, or an L, or a C for constitutionalist by their name when they run for a local office, whether it's school board, county commissioner, city council, or whatever, then I think that we can begin to turn the tide and evict some of these individuals. That's just my opinion. I'd like Darin to speak in on that, what his observation is, because I know that there are some legislators in the next session here in Montana that are talking about running a bill, and if we have enough of a majority, we might get it through. Another thing is to go back to closed primaries. Open primaries were another reform of the late 60s and early 70s in an effort to try to, quote, make things more democratic with a small d. And that to me is has resulted in the mess we're in. Thoughts, Darin?
John, I'm with you 100% on both of those. And in fact, last week I I sat and had lunch for an hour with Kristen Juris, and we were talking specifically about how judges really actually needed to declare their party. And that would clarify some things. And my wife ran for mayor here in Helena against Wilmot Collins, and nonpartisan so-called position. And it's quite clear that he's a Democrat and Sonda would be a Republican. And that clarifies a lot of things in some people's minds about where people stand. I think that would, yeah, I agree that it's basically the nonpartisan races are just a facade for people to hide behind, so they don't have to stand up and account for the positions that they actually hold when they get into office, because actions speak louder than words. And as a county chair, I would love to have closed primaries, because I'm sure we've all seen the no-name person come out of nowhere, file to run as a Republican, split the vote, and then you end up with bad representation and essentially a different color Democrat.
Well, Darin, thank you. Thank you. Everyone loves to be reaffirmed, and because we all sometimes think we have sole access to the truth, and it's nice to know that there are others that have equal access. But I have another suggestion too, besides closed primaries and partisan elections at the local level. And that is that we need to have our local elections, school boards and city councils, et cetera, at the same time as the general elections. And especially school board bonds and referendums,
Yes.
where large quantities of taxpayer money is going to be spent. I'm going to have, when I prevail in my election, I'm going to have a lot of things on my plate. I don't know if I'm capable of carrying all of those things, but I'm certainly hope that there will be others that will carry them on. And Darin, you're tied in closer to the Capitol. I trust you'll be there to help promote some ideas with legislators that will be floating those.
I absolutely will be. I'm 5 blocks away. I have no excuse. So, but I'm also a big fan of what you just said there too. And I mean, if I disagreed, I certainly would say it. But when it comes to aligning elections, absolutely, I see no reason not to. The unions pushed it to be in April for a reason, or off timing.
Okay. Well, one more thing, since we're talking with many school board candidates here tonight, the good news is this elections. We here in Montana, I think, what is it, March 24th is the last day for filing, and the elections in May, is it?
Yep, you're right, John.
Elections. Is that what it is, Jim?
Yep.
Okay. But Jim, why don't you talk a little bit to those candidates on how many votes you actually need in the various school districts, and isolate and get those votes.
Yeah, and it's a good question. John and Darin, both of you, thank you for the dialogue. And by the way, I was speaking to a very successful business owner earlier today about politics. He says, Jim, I'm as green as they come. You're going to have to explain it all to me. And if you're listening to this call and some of these things that John and Darin are talking about, and it seems a little bit foreign, like why do we care when we vote for school board and different things? Start taking notes and ask those questions on the side, or reach back to somebody that might be informed, and you realize how important some of these discussions are. And by the way, there's no question that's a bad question. We all heard that in school, but especially as you start to get involved in the political process and how important some of these things are, really can make a difference if you have the slightest understanding of some of these topics of conversation. To John's question, the board that I ran for here in Smith Valley has approximately 1,400 voters when I ran, 14 voting households, 1,600 now, so we gained a couple hundred. The amount of people that voted in this election were just over 230 people won the vote. Okay, so I came in second. There was 2 seats, so we fortunately gained 2 great conservatives on the school board here. I came in second out of 180 votes, and then the person that I beat out had been on the board for 40 plus years. He had 130 votes. So I think maybe the nature of John's question is it doesn't take a lot, but yet it does. You need to go out there and do the groundwork. And I know several people that are on these calls that are running for school board. This is, well, I'm not contested. My feeling is you go out there and you run your race like you are contested, that you need to win life or death, give it everything you've got, knock on every door you can, talk to every person you can, and raise as much money as you can to get the job done and come out victorious regardless. But in these rural towns and smaller cities, we're fortunate enough, even some of the other cities that you talked about, Darin, maybe outside of Florida, we're fortunate enough not to have the millions and the masses that we've got to win over the votes. We're closing in on the last couple of minutes, and I know we've got a question there, so I'm going to open up that question if you want to go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Since there's no dumb question,
No.
so in Utah, we have our last day to submit our names is March 4th, and then there's a primary in June. Explain to me why there's a primary for a school board, if you can, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's typically, if we're nonpartisan, we're not doing primaries against another contested vote.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Darin?
in Helena, with our nonpartisan races, sometimes it has to do with how many people are running,
Okay.
so they can narrow it down for the general.
So let's just say there's just me and the incumbent who's been there for, if we do the primary and there's only 2 of us, then it's only going to be 2 of us for the general election.
Yeah, so
Right.
that would forego that process, but anybody can drop in at the last minute. And it goes back to what I just said is we need to run our own elections. Like we got to go win, right? Pull all the resources you can, do the best job you can, look at your district, use the campaign tools we're giving you and the recommendations we're giving you. And by the way, I want to touch on that real quick before we wrap up here. Just a quick going back to campaigning. By now, regardless if you're running for school board and elections in May, or if you're running for another office that the elections aren't in November, you should already have a website being developed or almost done, because that website is going to be your home base where people can find out more about you. So as you get to the point where you're knocking on doors and people are in the middle of their dinner and they don't want to talk to you, say, look, here's my card. Look at my website. They have time to explore who you are and what your messaging is. So please, my advice is to build your foundational elements now, have them done before the end of the month, and be ready to go out and campaign for the balance of your election season. Not to mention a good website, especially the ones that we're able to help you with, will have the ability to capture donations through credit cards. You can always put an address on any website where they can send in mailers, but the ability to capture a credit card donation will start funding your campaign earlier than maybe what you expected. So with that being said, as it relates to campaigning and raising money, and John Fuller and I have gotten really good at this recently, don't be afraid to ask for the donation. You're doing something they didn't want to do. You raised your hand, they didn't, okay? Even if it's $20 will buy 4 more signs or some more mailers, 20 more mailers or whatever it might be. So don't be afraid to ask for the donations, okay? They can either write you a check, they can hand you the money, or they can go through your website to make the donation. It's also a good idea to get some donation envelopes that you can start handing out to friends and family. Again, you've raised your hand. Don't be afraid to ask for the donation, because I promise you, John will attest to this, so will Rod. Once you become elected, you're going to do the dirty work. Okay. And it'd be worth the $100 somebody donates to your campaign to not do the dirty work that we've all done. I just had an emergency school board meeting an hour before this call tonight. So you will get your hands dirty, and don't be afraid to ask. So with that being said, I want to be respectful of the time. John Fuller, thank you for attending. Darin, thank you so much for your time and what you're doing and your service. Keep up the great work. Rod, any closing comments before we hang out on this thing?
Yeah, just real quick. Next week, we're going to have, I believe, 3-time state legislator Mark Noland, Montana state legislator, is going to be here. And I've asked him to speak. He's a businessman. I've actually worked with him on some entrepreneurial things in the past, and how that business history translates into, being a good representative for the people. So we're going to talk about that. And also I'm going to address some people are afraid to get involved in elections because they don't want to alienate customers or clients if they find out they're on one side of an issue or another. So we're going to address that head on next week. So should be a good talk. Don't miss it.
What a great topic, Rod. I will say, once I become not so silent years ago, my business has increased and I've made a lot more friends, many of which are on the phone call tonight. So thank you all for attending. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
And please, you have resources to reach out to us if we can be helpful. Thank you.